Thank you. How's everybody today? Are you excited? This is one of my favorites. Here we go. Thank you, Kate, and good afternoon. My guest today is Betty Buckley, whose award-winning career has encompassed stage, film, TV, and concert work around the world. Her voice has been described as one of the wonders of the world and the finest voice in musical theater. She made her Broadway debut as Martha Washington in the musical 1776 and went on to dazzle audiences on stage in such shows as I'm Getting My Act Together and Taking It on the Road. Her Tony Award-winning turn as Grizabella in Andrew Lloyd Webber's Cats, singing the iconic Memory. Bringing down the house with her gender-bending performance in the Rupert Holmes musical The Mystery of Edwin Drood, Mama Rose in the classic musical Gypsy. She electrified audiences as silent screen star Norma Desmond in Sunset Boulevard and as Margaret White in the cult musical Carrie, to name a few. On film, she has worked with some of the finest directors, including Brian De Palma for Carrie, Bruce Beresford for Tender Mercies, Roman Polanski for Frantic, Woody Allen for Another Woman, and M. Night Shyamalan for The Happening. On television, she is known to millions of fans as Abby Bradford on 8 is Enough and as Suzanne Fitzgerald on HBO's hit TV series Oz. She has recorded 16 solo albums, including her latest called Ghostlight, produced by the legendary T-Bone Burnett. Most recently, she starred to rave reviews as Gertrude in Horton Foote's play The Old Friends. In April 2009, she received the Texas Medal of the Arts in Theater following her induction into the Texas Film Hall of Fame in Austin, Texas in March 2007. She has been awarded 2 honorary doctorates of fine arts for her contribution to the musical theater by Marymount College and the Boston Conservatory of Music. And in 2012, she was inducted into the Theater Hall of Fame. Please welcome Miss Betty Buckley. Hi there. So you've got your own mic there. Yours is blue, mine's yellow.
Great.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Well,
Thank you for being here.
I love your new album, Ghostlight.
Thank you.
Which reunites you with T-Bone Burnett. How did this album come about?
Well, T-Bone and I grew up together in Fort Worth, Texas, and his mother, Hazel Vernon, was a friend of my mother's, Betty Bob. And so the two of them, I knew T-Bone around, all the musicians in town were kind of aware of each other, and I was a girl singer that was singing with a little jazz combo at the Casa del Sol Jazz Club, and we had a very close mutual friend, a young man I went to high school with named Stephen Bruton. And Stephen's father, Sumter, owned Record Town in Fort Worth. And that's where we all went to get our vinyl recordings. And, you know, we were all aware of all kinds of music. And I think those early days in Fort Worth was when we became fans of world music and not categorizable music. Anyway, Hazel and Betty Bob decided that Joseph Henry and I should get together and make an archive recording because T-Bone owned his own recording studio from the time he was 17, which is pretty remarkable if you think about it, you know. And so one Saturday afternoon, I went in and recorded a handful of songs that I'd been singing with this jazz ensemble, or this jazz trio. And it was an archive tape on a reel-to-reel tape. There were 2 copies. And I sent one copy to my first agent who signed me when I was a junior at TCU, Texas Christian University. I'd been a guest entertainer at the Miss America pageant, representing all the losers in America who never make it to Atlantic City. And so that's a long story. But anyway, because I was on television singing and dancing, they called me from this agency in New York, which was then called Ashley Famous Agency, and then became International Famous Agency, and is now ICM. And they asked me to fly into New York right after the Miss America pageant and sing for these agents, and I did, and they signed me. And then they said, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to go back and finish college, because my father was very opposed to my being in show business. And so I went back to school, and in the meantime, we'd made this recording. And so I sent a copy to my first agent, Roger Hess, who went on to become a great Broadway producer. And he kept it for a gajillion years and played it for the publisher of Playbill, a man named Phil Bursch, who was starting his own record label several years ago. And he called me and said, we want to release this archive recording, which I hadn't heard for years and years and years, as the first album you never had. And so they released it and called it Betty Buckley 1967. It was released by Playbill and Sony BMG. And then we sent a copy. It was released on vinyl and CD. We sent a copy to T-Bone. And he and I had stayed in touch all these years as friends. Whenever he would come to New York, we'd hang out, have dinner, go see a play or whatever. And he would always casually say, well, we need to make another record. And I would say, yeah, we need to make another record. But, I didn't think too much about that because he was pretty busy with Elton John and the Rolling Stones and Robert Plant and people like that. So I was like, yeah, that's pretty far-fetched, So, but it was always nice of him to say that. And then we sent him this recording, and he, was so moved to recall our youth and what we'd done when we were both 19. And then he kind of started talking seriously about it. And then a couple of years ago, he called out of the blue in June and said, my schedule is cleared for the summer. We need to make that album. I want you to come to LA and let's really make this record. And I was really excited. I was like, oh my God. So I flew to LA and we sat down and started working on the record. And he had a bunch of great ideas and directed it very cinematically. And the way he saw it was so fascinating. And I tell you, the recording sessions for Ghostlight where I felt like I had moved into another realm. I mean, T-Bone is so brilliant, and his mind is just so big, and he's just has such a vast intelligence. I always get rather dizzy when I'm around him. I'm always like, whoa, it's like, it's hard to keep up with him, but he's such a wonderful, generous, loving man, and certainly this record was one of the greatest gifts anyone has ever given me. And every night when I come home from the recording sessions, I just felt like I was in heaven, in some heavenly realm, because he surrounded me with musicians that are just so brilliant, like Bill Frisell, the world-class guitar player, and these other brilliant musicians on the record. And we recorded at the Village Recording Studios, which is a very famous recording studio in Los Angeles. And the actual room we recorded in was built for Fleetwood Mac, and the vocal booth was built for Stevie Nicks. And so I was like, oh my God, this is so cool. Because I was a hippie kid when I was growing up. I really was a child of the 60s and, went to school in the late 60s. And always wanted to be a part of that music scene. And while we were making the record, T-Bone said, people don't know this about you, Betty Lynn, but all you ever really wanted to be is the singer with the band, And I begged my family to let me go to Berkeley, when I went to college, because, Janis Joplin had grown up in Beaumont, Texas, and I thought, I can sing like that. I need to go to San Francisco. And my dad was like, over my dead body, you will go to Texas Christian University and you will like it, And my mother was like, here, listen to this recording of Julie Andrews. And I was like, Mom. So anyway, it's a huge gift, and I'm really, really thrilled that the album is out in the world, and I, love T-Bone Burnett beyond loving.
You have released an astounding 16 solo albums.
Thank you.
You are as mesmerizing on a recording as you are in live performance. What gives you the greatest artistic satisfaction out of recording?
Well, what's so beautiful about recording, I've always thought of myself as a kind of portrait painter, only I paint with sound and with music, and with image, with words and beautiful lyrics. But I've always seen the stories that I tell in songs very cinematically, like T-Bone does, actually, which I didn't really know we had that in common. But whenever I'm singing in performance or concert or cabaret or in the musical theater, I always see this little movie running in front of my mind's eye, and I've always, it's like a series of images that I've carefully worked out, because I work on my material really. It takes me a long time to create even, it took me months to get memory right in Cats. And I kind of really learned how to work on material in the experience of learning how to sing memory, which was a huge gift in my life from Andrew Lloyd Webber and Trevor Nunn and Gillian Lynn. And that was an amazing opportunity to step into the potential that I had been working to manifest in my life for a number of years. And finally, with that part, the part of Grizabella, and with that beautiful song, you know, I was able to finally step into what I'd been studying for so many years to be able to learn how to do. What was your question?
No, you did. That's what's perfect.
So what I love about recording is that, you know, I work on this stuff a lot. Yeah. And about 25 years ago, I met this group of musicians that became my band, my ensemble for 20 years. And we created new bodies of music twice a year, every year, and we would present them at the Bottom Line, where Alan Pepper, you know, became my real champion. I started doing concert work, you know, after Cats opened. I had been singing in clubs and stuff when I was a kid, but was not really a concert artist, even though I aspired to be. Like, when I first moved to New York City, I went to see Sarah Vaughan at the Philharmonic Hall, and I had standing room only tickets and stood in the back and watched her with this trio of musicians, you know, and she sang Everything Must Change in the middle of her concert. And I remember that moment when she finished and the audience was in this state of breathless silence, you know, and then just erupted and did this applause for, you know, this soul experience that she had assisted us all to experience. And so I was so moved by that. And I really wanted to become, you know, I studied, the way I learned to sing was listening to all these recordings of all the great lady singers and imitating them, you know. And I could imitate some of their albums, you know, like note by note, you know. And I would, you know, that's how I learned. And I really aspired to become a great singer, you know. I don't know that I'm such a great singer, but I am a good storytelling singer. And that's what my voice is. I studied with this brilliant teacher for 19 and a half years named Paul Gavert. And he used to say, you know, you have the capacity, your capacity to focus is really the source. You know, he would say, beautiful work, Betty Len, beautiful acting, beautiful singing is about one pointed focus. And if you can do that, you can do anything. And so I learned in the same time period to meditate. And that really taught me how to focus my mind. And my teacher used to say, one breath becomes the next breath, becomes the next breath. One note becomes the next note, becomes the next note. One vowel becomes the next vowel, becomes the next vowel. And then through meditation, I realized it's more than that. It's even one thought becomes the next thought, becomes the next thought. And the only way to do that, and he used to stress, like, I would take my songs into him and I'd be so proud of what I'd worked on, you know, and I'd sing for him and he'd say, okay, that was nice, but we need more line, more line, more line. And you know, it took me years to understand what he meant by line. I'd studied with him for 13 years when I finally got memory to sing. And it was like I'd been collecting all this information. I mean, I think, you know, I understand that a lot of you are actors and singers and, you know, so one thing I can say to you is, and I've been a teacher for over 40 years, over 41 years, actually. I've been teaching, and, you know, I've met so many talented people, so many gifted people in New York and, you know, all over the country. And they're very talented, very beautiful. They have all this, you think they have everything, but they don't want to work hard. You know, they want to just kind of, if they were little stars in their high school, they want to kind of just rest on their laurels, and they go to acting classes for somebody to say, yes, bless you, my child, you are a star. You know, and I never understood that, because, you know, it takes so much work to be a good singer, to be a good actor, and it takes a lifetime to grow into yourself as a human being. You know, it's a lifetime. And somehow or another, you know, I've been blessed with certain knowings that kind of, I knew some things from the time I was a teenager. For example, I knew that my best work would be in my later years. And so, and I was grateful to know that, and knew that if I just kept working, if I just kept studying, I would get better, you know, and I was committed to that journey. And it's true, you know. And it took me 13 years of studying with this guy to even begin to understand what he was talking about. And I was, you know, I was still working in the world, and I thought I could do some stuff. Suddenly I had this song memory to sing, and nothing I knew how to do was working. And the job assignment was stop the show. And I had no idea how to stop a show. You know, I had stopped shows, but I didn't know there was a way to do it, you know. You know, it's like it had kind of happened, and I was like, well, that was nice, but, you know, if you asked me how it happened, I had no clue. And so it was like, your job assignment is stop the show. And I was like, whoa, how do you do that, you know? And so through all the previews of Cats, I wasn't stopping the show, and I nearly lost my job, you know? And they were panicked. They were calling all these special rehearsals, and it was crazy. It just went on. And I called my teacher one day, because we were rehearsing in the daytime and previewing at night at the Winter Garden Theater, and his studio was just down the block. I called him, I said, Paul, I can't do this. I don't know what's going to happen. I think they're going to fire me. And he said, get over here on your lunch break. So I got over there on my lunch break, and he threw a pillow on the floor. And he said, beat this pillow. And I said, Paul, please believe me, a kinetic exercise is not going to work at this moment. I'm about to lose my job, and this is like a great job opportunity. Do you understand? Like, it's not working. You have to teach me how to stop the show. And and he goes, get down on the floor and beat this pillow. And you know, just to give you he was this very tall, white-haired, very elegant man who had this beautiful, beautiful studio filled with gorgeous modern paintings by his lovely wife, Olive. And he had a caramel-colored Steinway grand piano, caramel-colored. It was so beautiful. And as much as anything, I would go there twice a week just because I thought the place was so pretty, you know. And he would wear these impeccably tailored Italian suits. And he smoked, which I never understood that. I was like, he always was smoking so elegantly. And I was like, how can you do that? How can you smoke and sing like you do? And he goes, because I sing, you know. And I was just like, I didn't understand anything. And so he throws the pillow down on his, you know, elegant Italian carpet next to the caramel-colored Steinway and said, beat this pillow. And I was like, ugh. So I got down on my hands and knees and started beating the pillow. I was like, I'm beating the pillow, and I'm like, beating the pillow, beating the pillow. Suddenly I start crying, you know, and I'm like, then crying and sobbing and crying and sobbing. And this little kid's voice comes out, you know, in my head. It's like saying, I'm here too, I'm here too. And I'm like, oh my God. I mean, I know that sounds really new age, and I don't mean to bore you or anything, but I realized that the kid in me, the 11-year-old that first loved the musical theater and that loved those lady singers, you know, was like, she had not been consulted as how she wished to sing Memory. And, you know,
Wow.
I mean, I was trying so hard to please Trevor Nunn and trying so hard to please Andrew Lloyd Webber. I remember one rehearsal with Andrew Lloyd Webber, which was hilarious. It was like it went on for an hour, and he had me sing Memory over and over and over again for an hour. And then he would say, Placido Domingo was at the show last night, and he said, tell the girl to just sing the song. And I was like, I am just singing the song. What is he talking about, you know? And then Trevor called a special 2-hour rehearsal where he told me the entire story of The Winter's Tale. And I was like, you know, trying to cling to every word, every image he gave me. And for the life of me, to this day, I have no understanding of how The Winter's Tale applied to Grizabella and Cats. Zero, you know. I just still am absolutely clueless about that. And I've contemplated it quite a lot. And then I asked my friend James Lapine to come see it, you know, and I called him. I said, James, can you please come see this, because it's not working, and I don't know why. You know, I'm doing everything they said. I mean, my choreography was down to my pinky. Everything about me was choreographed, and I was singing it note by note the way I thought they wanted, and I was imagining The Winter's Tale, and it was so ridiculous. And so Lapine, we go out after the show, and he says, well, Betty, you're doing it really well. Everything's really nice, but I have no idea how you feel. And I'm like, how I feel? I feel the winter's tale. I feel, I feel what Andrew wants me to. So then, I had the experience with Paul and the pillow, and I was like, oh. So then I really turned within, and, I'm a meditator, and I pray a lot and meditate a lot. And so this inner voice, this inner being, this inner child started taking me around the streets of New York City to follow homeless people. And that turned it all around, because I was like, oh, I see. And I saw women my same age, I was 35, whose eyes were just like mine. And sorry, it was just a really profoundly beautiful experience in my life. One morning, I walked out of my apartment building. I lived at West 86th and West End. And there was this woman who'd lived in our neighborhood for a number of years that I'd never paid attention to. And she had hair the color of Grizabella. I swear to God, this is the truth. She had hair the color of Grizabella's and white pasty makeup and red lipstick that was smeared. And she floated across my path and made eye contact with me. And she wasn't pathetic in any way. And they'd been directing me. And Trevor kept saying, pathos, pathos, which was a result, but not what I should play. So that's part of what I learned. And she looked at me as if to say, I have so much I could share with you, but you don't have time, and neither do I. And then she just floated off down the street, like in slow motion. And I was like, wow, that's really extraordinary. And then 2 nights later, the universe, just in case I didn't get it the first time, sent me, because I often don't get it, so they wanted to be sure I got it. So the universe sent me another woman, quite like the first, hair the color of Grizabella's, white pasty makeup, red lipstick that was smeared. And she crossed my path and floated by me at the stage door of the Winter Garden. I swear to God, this happened exactly as I'm telling you. And I was shocked. And I couldn't believe it. I was like, and she made eye contact with me. And again, there was this tremendous sense of dignity and self-respect. And it was very profound. And it was like, I have so much I could share with you, but you don't have time, and neither do I, maybe later. And she floated off down the street. And I was like, okay, I think I got it. And so it took me about 2 weeks to incorporate all those things I was experiencing. Like, one woman chased me down the street because she saw me studying her, and so I learned to, place myself at a discreet distance. And I just went through all this stuff, and they kept coming to me, trying to help me, Trevor, Andrew, and fortunately, my inner self came up with this. I said, I'm in transition. And they were like, oh, she's in transition.
Preston, do you have tissues? I'm going to give you tissues. Baby.
Okay, thank you. So I have no idea why they bought that. But they did, and they said, okay, she's in transition. And so it took me 2 weeks of still not stopping the show. I mean, I'd sing, and nothing would happen. And so then one night I went out there, and it just kind of all came together. It was like everything I'd been collecting from Paul Gabbert for 13 years, all the impressions that I was getting, everything that I was opening myself to receive, it was like it was all in pieces inside me. And then through, all this focus and contemplation and meditation, it was like it all just came together like boom, 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 and lined up. And I walked out on stage, and I just was like there. And instead of doing what I'd done before, because basically Grizabella's journey is 13 minutes, which I never knew. I thought it was a really big part. And years later, I went to sing Memory in London for the 8th anniversary of Cats. And I kept waiting for Grizabella, and she never, and I was like, oh my God, it's a really small part. I had no idea. So, but her journey, what she does is she keeps coming out and trying to be a part of the Cats proceedings, and they keep shooing her away. And as Trevor said to me, you know, she's based on a 4-line fragment of a poem from T.S. Eliot called Remark the Cat, that they sing about her early in the first act. And everything else is a contrivance of Trevor's, and he even wrote the lyric of Memory. The other song they had wasn't working, and they brought it in later. And he wrote that, and he was a socialist, and he was very, very concerned about the issue of homelessness in our culture. And we, as a culture, were just starting to become aware of that in 1982 when Cats was opening in New York. And so I had all that information, and so I understood what it was he wanted to say with Grizabella, but then it's like learning how you can best say that as yourself. And this was like so important for my understanding, going through all this. So he had been directing me to come out, and I'm constantly reaching out. She reaches out, and the little kittens want to come and participate with her, but then the adult cats send them away and send her away. And she's constantly rejected, and then finally she comes out and sings Memory in, towards the end of the show as a cri de coeur, cry of the heart. And then the patriarch cat picks her to go to the Heaviside Layer. And so that's kind of it in a nutshell. I mean, there's a little more to it than that, but that kind of was it. So instead of what my experience was, the night it all came together was, I walked out and I was just there, and I really, really had imbibed what I'd witnessed in these two women and all the other women that I'd observed on the streets, which was, I have so much to share with you, but I know you can't maybe now, but so maybe next time. And there was this remarkable sense of fierce dignity and self-respect, and respect for all others, and this tremendous love. And I sang Memory that night, and there was that breathless silence, and then people went crazy, and I was like, that's it. And so when I came off stage, Trevor Nunn met me in the wings. He goes, that's it, that's what I was talking about. And I was like, wow, okay. That's what he was talking about, because basically I had played the opposite of everything he directed me to do. I mean, the exact opposite, moment to moment, the exact opposite. And that's how I learned to work with directors, and what I understood. I know that sounds... Okay, I don't want to warn off any directors in terms of... No, but let me explain to you why. Because what I learned is that words are symbols. They're just symbols. We made them up. Human beings made up language, right? So every single word that we use to express ourselves is just the best we can do about what is, whether it's a feeling or a circumstance or the world around us. They're just symbols. And symbols mean different things to different people. Like someone could describe to me something that's really important to them in a certain set of words, and it might feel like something very different to me, So what I learned was I listen with my whole being when I'm working with a director, and I take in what they're saying, but I pay attention to how it makes me feel all over, inside, at the soul level, whatever. And then I bring that best experience, that highest experience, to the circumstance, and generally, it's what they really mean. And I was like startled to learn that, because prior to that, I'd been trying to interpret people literally for a really long time, and then wondering why it wasn't working. And so that was really startling. And so it was, thankfully, and I owe Andrew Lloyd Webber and Trevor Nunn and Gillian Lynn a debt of thanks, for that entire experience. And Cameron McIntosh and the Schuberts and everybody, because that experience was the doorway where everything I'd been studying for so long, from all different schools, Stella Adler, the Actors Studio, my teacher and everything I'd learned, everything I'd read, suddenly and experienced up to that point coalesced in the opportunity to play Grizabella. And I refer to her as my soulmate, my great teacher, and my, life companion. And I visit with her when I sing her song. But she's an amazing creature who taught me so much. and I'm really grateful.
Beautiful. Thank you for that. Wow. We're going to stay on some of this because I know we have some singers in the audience today, and I think you've answered part of this question. So now when you sing one of your signature songs, like Memory, which I still think is the definitive version of that song, would you agree?
Thank you. Thank you.
Or your classic Meadowlark, for us in the audience, it always feels like the first time.
Oh, thank you.
How does the material stay new for you? Do you revisit like the story you told us in your mind in a shorter version, or how do you revisit those and make it seem so fresh?
Well, for memory's a place to me. It's like, it's always the same place. Like once I established it, I see, as soon as I hear the opening chords of the song, you know, I immediately enter that realm. And it's very specific, and I always see the same things. It's always the same place. I can't tell you the specificity of all that I experienced because I firmly believe you shouldn't share all of your tools because they're sacred. And if you share too much of the specifics, it loses its specialness, you know. But memory's pretty clear. There's a moon, you know, she's alone on the street. There are leaves, there's the wind, there are street lamps, there are voices in the distance, you know. And they're always in the same place, wherever I'm singing it, whether it's a concert hall or a cabaret. And it's exactly the same realm that I learned to, you know, see in the Winter Garden. And so there's the place. And then I just lend my soul to Grizabella's experience in that moment. And it's interesting to feel how she's grown and changed through the years, because she grows and changes, obviously, the way I do, because, you know, we're tied to this together. And so she keeps showing me new things, you know, about how to see, mainly how to see, and how to really see the world around you and experience it from a depth of appreciation and compassion. Yeah. And I love her. I just love her. And I'm sorry I'm all teary today. She means a lot to me.
Sure.
You know, I don't mean to be a wuss about it. In fact, I hate wusses. I just hate them. You know, I'm teaching a workshop right now, a 5-day workshop, and one of my students is here, and I really busted her the other night for being a wuss. I was just like, no sissies in singing, you know. There's no room for it. And I lecture them, you know, consistently about being really strong, and that, you have to be really strong to be in show business, or the business of show. You know, you must be very strong, and to really be a good singer, you need to be you have to train like an athlete. You have to be fierce, really fierce, and really centered, you know, and have your feet flat on the ground and be really tied to the earth and connected to the heavens, you know, and it's all centered right there in your heart. That takes a lot of work. It's not an easy thing, you know, at all. And, you know, I'm always so surprised when, you know, some of my students, my singer actors, think it's all going to be, easy. It's ludicrously difficult, but worth every moment of the labor, you know, because when you finally create a painting after all the frustration that you go through. I've learned that in every time I take on something new, whether it's a new song or a new part or whatever it is, you know, at the beginning there's this I get to work on this, it's exciting, you know, and then you start learning it and you start taking it apart and understanding it and working on it. And at every point, I reach a point of pure frustration where I think it's just impossible and that I have no clue. I start with, I have no clue what I'm doing. And then I get to a point of complete frustration. And I've learned that that's a very high point. And then if you just persist, then you move into ultimate boredom. And then I've learned that is a really high point when you're at the level of boredom, because then if you persist, you break through to another experience of it, and then you're home, you know. And then when I say home, you can't rest there. You have to just know that you know how to do it, but it's going to keep evolving and keep changing. And it's it's beautiful, but you have to be interested in that process, I think, to be a professional actor, a professional singer. If you think it's all about your personality and just having everybody just adore you, that's crazy. And sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. And you just have to find your reasons for sharing your song, no matter what, no matter what, no matter what,
Well, I want to go back to the beginning for a second, your Broadway debut, because your Broadway debut was as Martha Washington. Oh, I'm sorry, I called her Martha Washington. I said that when I figured this all out. Martha Jefferson, yes, in 1776.
Thomas Jefferson.
It's Thomas Jefferson, exactly. See, I didn't do very well in social studies. I only did really good in theater. I can tell you who's doing all this stuff, but I couldn't figure this out. But 1776 is one of my all-time favorite musicals. So what got you to New York, and how did you land that role? Because you did it like in one day, right?
Well, I was signed by this wonderful agency, and this great guy named Roger Hess, was very, he believed that I could have a career in New York and in show business, and he kept calling me my senior year at TCU saying, when are you coming? And I was like, well, I have to finish school. My father was a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force, and he was very strict, to say the least. And I called him, years later when I learned what this was, I called him a Victorian fundamentalist, but he was a bit of a radical guy. And I have 3 younger brothers, and they all had to have buzz cuts all through the 60s, military haircuts, because he was desperately afraid that the 60s were going to ruin the United States, and that the idea of the nuclear family was going to be destroyed. And so at all costs, we were going to save the country. And so and so it was interesting because my mother had been a singer-dancer, and she was known as the jitterbug queen of Texas Tech University, and she had really wild red curly hair and was a great singer-dancer. And he saw her at a dance and decided he had to marry her. And they met, and then he went off to World War II as a bombardier, and he wrote her prolific love letters, and then came back to Texas. He's from South Dakota, Lemon, South Dakota, which is like just a blip. You drive there, that's it. There's Lemon. They do have a petrified wood forest there, though. And and my grandfather, Norman C., was known as Kid Buckley. He was a real cowboy. And so my dad, came back and married my mother and told her then, of course, she couldn't be a singer-dancer. And so when I manifested this love for song, and I was singing from the time, my mother says from the time I was 2, she then was very much a stage mother and really exposed me to great music and all the great musicals through the albums, the soundtrack albums and stuff. And I remember seeing Mary Martin's Peter Pan on our black and white television, and she took me to see my first musical when I was 11, So she loved that I was a performer. And, I became a performer when I was 11 and a professional when I was 15. And so she would sneak me out of the house for my dance classes. And my aunt had been a dance teacher and had danced for the original Billy Rose Theater Casa Manana in Fort Worth. And my aunt actually escaped to Hollywood because she wanted to dance in the big musical movies. And my mother was literally sent to Hollywood to collect my aunt and bring her home. And there were some great stories about that. But my dad and my mother would fight, like these huge fights about me and my talent. And so that left me really confused about a lot of things. So he was very, very opposed to my being in show business. I mean, it was very dramatic. So I told Roger Hess all that, and I said, I just don't know if my dad's going to let me come. And then after I finished college, and I majored in journalism, I went to school on a journalism scholarship because my father was so opposed to my being a theater. And there was the head of the theater department at TCU quickly recognized my abilities and the fact that my father was so adamant. And so he arranged for there to be a theater minor program at TCU so that I could be connected with the theater department. And then he was so great, he picked a production every year I could be in. So the journalism department was really mad because I was not doing what they expected of me on scholarship because I was always at the theater department, And anyway, after college, I went on a USO tour to Korea and Japan. It was the Vietnam War, 1968. These performers were killed right before we left the Miss America troupe. There were like 7 girls, Miss America, and 6 of the rest of us. And Miss America and I were both 21. And so we were detoured to all of the military bases in Japan. I mean, all the military bases in Korea and all of the military hospitals in Japan, because these performers were killed in Vietnam. And so we were based out of Tokyo and then helicoptered around. And so Miss America, Deborah Barnes, and I were taken into all the intensive care units where all these boys were dying. And my father, had been a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force, and he was very much a hawk. He was very like, war is necessary, da-da-da-da-da. And so I came back after that experience, and I was really changed. And I was like, war is not cool, Dad. And he thought the world was going to end, that I had become a hippie, And so I became very depressed, and I couldn't. The idea of show business, he finally won, seems so trivial, And so I just went to work at the local newspaper. And so Roger Hess kept calling. And he said, look, I have an industrial show for B.F. Goodrich with Flip Wilson, the comedian, and Your Father's Mustache, this band. And you and your mother come to Dallas and see this show. So I did with my mom, and they called me up on stage and had me sing. And so I sang, and everybody liked it, and the audience was great. And so the buyer was there, and he put me in the show. So I got to go to Atlanta, Chicago, San Francisco, all these cities on the weekend to do this show. And the last stop was Philadelphia. And he said, why don't you just train it into New York, because I've got another industrial show for you for 8 weeks for Gimbel's Department Store. Industrial shows used to be a big deal in New York, where you would do this musical show to sell a product or to represent a corporation or whatever. And so everybody in Fort Worth wanted me to move to New York except my dad. And so, but my dad couldn't deny the money, It's like, he was like, well, okay, well, it's just 6 weeks, whatever. So I trained it in, and I called Roger. I moved into the Barbizon Hotel for Women, and I had my little dog, and I moved into the hotel. I called him. I said, well, I'm here. And he said, you have an audition in 15 minutes at the American Theater Laboratory. Take your music, jump in a cab, and go. So I went downtown to this place, and I was the last girl to audition on the last day of auditions for the role of Martha Jefferson in 1776. And they had cast another girl who was a classic soprano, and that section of the show wasn't working to their satisfaction, but they didn't know how to fix it, and they didn't know what was wrong. So they reopened auditions. And in fact, Donna McKechnie walked out right before me, and I didn't know her name, but I was like, oh, that's a New York actress. Look at her. She's so cool, And she had on this little mini skirt and these like high boots and her beautiful curly hair, And I was like, wow, this is so exciting. And so I went in and I sang Rose of Washington Square, which was my Miss Fort Worth song, if you can imagine. And it was also my Six Flags Over Texas song. It was assigned to me by this showman named Charlie Meeker. And I thought, I don't like this song, And he was like, oh, believe me, it's great. And so, sure enough, it would stop the show in the amphitheater at Six Flags Over Texas, So that became my big song. But it was a really kick-ass arrangement. That's why it stopped the show, but whatever. I sang that for them, and they were like, who are you? And I was like, I'm Betty Lynn Buckley. And they said, where are you from? And I said, Fort Worth, Texas. And they said, when did you get to town? I said, today. And they were like, today? Oh my God, it's like a movie, it's like a movie. And I still didn't know, there were about 11 of them, and they looked really important, so I didn't. And they kept me there. So I went into the waiting room, and the stage manager comes out, this guy named Peter Stern. He said, "Do you have any idea what you're auditioning for?" And I said, "No." And he said, "This is a big Broadway musical. And if you get this part, you're like the luckiest little girl I've ever met." And I was like, "Oh, that's really cool," you know. And so, so I went in again, and I read for them. And what they liked was I could sing the song as the soprano, or I could sing it in this high belt and, you know, whatever, and different keys, which gave them all these choices, and they liked that. And so by the next day, I was in costume fittings, and I called my mother that night, and I said, "I think something really great's about to happen." Yes.
That's great. But you also learned the ropes from like William Daniels and Howard Da Silva. They sort of...
Yeah, I was so fortunate because that musical was 30 men, and to begin with, there were 3 women, and then the Dizzy Lamb part was cut on the road. And then Gretchen Cryer was Virginia Vestoff's and my understudy, and so the 3 of us shared a dressing room. Virginia Vestoff was this beautiful actress, you know, who played Abigail Adams, and Gretchen Cryer went on to write Getting My Act Together and, you know, other wonderful musicals, and she was terrific and is terrific. And so I learned a lot from them, but then the best thing was that all the guys, of the 30 guys in the show and the 2 women's roles, they were all actors who sang, you know, and so they were brilliant. You know, Howard Da Silva, William Daniels, and Paul Hecht, and on, everybody in that show were brilliant guys. And so William Daniels, Paul Hecht, and Da Silva really took me under their wings and told me very honestly, because, you know, I was 21, they sat me down one by one and said, "Okay, this is what you have going for you, and this is what you know how to do, and this is what you need to learn, and here's where you need to go to learn that." And so I went to the same school where Virginia Vestoff was studying, and I followed everyone's counsel. I didn't, you know, I was like, yes, I want to learn that. And I knew what good acting was because of my role models, you know, these great actresses that I loved, but I had no idea how to work like that. But I had this vision of that I thought it would be possible to be that kind of dramatic, realistic, truth-telling actress in the context of musicals. And that wasn't really a style of work in the musical theater quite yet. But I really wanted to be able to do that. So I worked really hard, and I followed their counsel. I have a great Howard Da Silva story. You want to hear that?
Sure.
Howard Da Silva, you know who he was? He's a brilliant man. He was the original Benjamin Franklin, and he had this huge movie career. He was in The Great Gatsby, among other wonderful films. And he was blacklisted in the 1950s, and his career, which was huge, just dissipated, was gone. And it was horrible, you know, horrible. And he was such a gifted actor. And so for him, 1776 was this huge opportunity to be back, you know, full tilt boogie, you know, with his incredible skills as Benjamin Franklin. I mean, the guy was masterful. You know, you could, just studying his back acting, when he would turn his back to the audience, you know, on this like rake stage for the Continental Congress. I mean, the guy was so powerful and so brilliant. And he was, you know, fragile, and I didn't know that. I was 21, and one of the big lessons I learned in my life, which I can share with you, is when I was younger, I thought, you know, people that were older and had authority and prestige or, you know, power in show business must be really together. And this was an important lesson for me. And plus, I thought because I was young and dopey, you know, that they'd be interested in what I had to say, which they weren't. And that was really sobering. But I had no idea how fragile everybody in show business is. Even the most powerful people in show business are so fragile. And I didn't know that sometimes people that are immensely gifted in one territory of their lives doesn't mean that they're a completely balanced together human being, clueless about that information. And so I learned all these things. So one day, what happened was I inherited the costume and the wig and the choreography and design of the Martha Jefferson situation from their previous ideas. And that leads me to another story. It was terrible. Should I keep telling these stories?
Conversations with Betty Buckley,
okay.
Sure.
Well, in New Haven, our first night in New Haven, here's what happened, which then will bring me back to Howard DeSilva. So I had this like humongous dress designed by the great Patty Ziprod with these huge panniers. And Patty was really insistent that it be historic, exactly as it was made, with this lace that, laced up in this dress, And this massive wig that was brown, because the previous girl had brown hair. And so the color palette was for her and everything, and I'd never had brown hair. And I watched Virginia Vestoff do her makeup, so I decided that I needed to go to the drugstore and get darker makeup because I had brown hair. So I went to the drugstore and I got this really dark makeup, so to match my brown hair, right? And darker rouge and really blue eyeshadow and stuff. And I'm watching Virginia Vestoff, do her makeup, and she was like, "Quit staring at me." And I'm like, "Okay." So, and then I would just watch her when she didn't know I was looking. And so the opening night in New Haven, I did my own makeup. And so when Martha Jefferson first appears, she appears at this window, and Franklin and Adams are on the street, talking about, before that, she appears in a cape, and she does this long kiss with Thomas Jefferson. And then, she's swept up into his hotel or whatever. And Franklin and Adams are on the street telling raunchy jokes about how, Martha will help uncork Thomas Jefferson's writer's block. And so then the next morning, she appears at the window, and she's supposed to be, literally, it says in the script, a breath of fresh air. So I open the window, and I look like a cigar store Indian. I'm not kidding. And everyone gasped. Everyone was like, literally, you heard everybody go, and Howard DeSilva and William Daniels are like, and I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know what it was anyway. So they are laughing, and they kind of cajole me onto the street. So I come now downstairs, and I come through this door, which had a spring latch. And no one knew that I needed help having the door be held open by a stagehand while I negotiated these 3.5-foot panniers through the door, and then down 2 steps to get to this rake stage. So after this garish first appearance at the window, I then come through the door, and the spring latch snaps shut on one of my panniers. And I'm like halfway down the stairs, and I'm lurching, pulling the pannier who is stuck in the door. And finally it comes unstuck, and I literally tumble onto the stage, and they catch me before I fall in the orchestra pit, basically. That was my first appearance and it was humiliating, and I was really sure that I would be fired. I was like, oh God, that's it. Opportunity dead in the water, It was hilarious, and they were all really like, nobody said anything. I was just like, oh God, this is just terrible. Well, then Stuart Ostro, who's very kind, came to me and said, Betty, we're going to redesign your dress, and we're going to redesign your wig. We've realized, and we're going to bring in a makeup artist. So now they redesigned the whole number, and the great choreographer, Anna White, was genius, and she was fabulous. And she would call rehearsals where she literally would make me run across the floor of the rehearsal studio over and over again. And she would scream at the top of her lungs, "Float!" I said, "Float! You look like a track star. Float!" Do not lurch about. And so I was like, trying to learn how to float in this outfit. And so they redesigned this lovely dress and new color palette, blonde wig, and brought in a makeup artist. And so that was all great. And so one day, unfortunately, and they reorchestrated the song too. And the whole waltz became really delicate and beautiful, and it was just really exquisite. And I was so excited. And Ostro assured me that I wasn't going to be fired, which was really nice of him to do. And so one day in rehearsal, unfortunately, I referred to it as my number. And Howard DeSilva went crazy. And what happened was during rehearsals, almost every day, he would have a huge blow up at somebody. And and it kind of, he went through the whole team one by one. And it was my turn that day. And so he turned to me and he was savage and he goes, "This is not your number." He says, "There's 2 people on stage with you. Do you have any idea? Don't you ever refer to this as your number." And I was, "I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry." And I'll never do that again. So then after that, during while we were out of town in Washington, we were on this rake, and the penultimate moment of the dance, which was with John Adams, and then I spin under his arm, and then we do this kind of thing. We kind of do it becomes kind of more funny, and then I turn under his arm, and Howard Da Silva catches me right before I fall into the orchestra pit, at the edge of this point of this rake stage, and he would take his hand after he would catch me and just kind of tilt it into the pit to let me know that he could throw me into the pit at any point, you know. I mean, it was a very clear communication, and I was like, I think he's going to throw me in the orchestra pit. So I was really scared, you know, because I knew he was mad at me. And so I went to Anna White, and I said, "Miss White, I just have to say, I think Mr. Da Silva is going to throw me in the orchestra pit." And she said, "No, Betty, he's not going to throw you in the orchestra pit." And I said, "No, I really think I made him very angry. And I think that's going to happen any night now. What do I do about that?" You know? And she says, "I tell you what you do. You go up to his dressing room, and you take him to dinner." And I said, "Okay." So I went and I knocked on his door, and he was really gruff. And I said, "Mr. Da Silva, I was wondering if I might take you to dinner, you know." So I took him to this great fish place in Washington. And I asked him, because, you know, I was a journalist, and my mom had taught me to really interview people and stuff, because she had been a journalist too. And so I started asking him about his life, and he told me the whole story of his life, and it was so sad and so profound, all the stuff he'd been through. And I became one of his best friends after that. And that was another great life lesson. That was extraordinary. And then after that, after I did the show 7 months, I went to London for a year to do Promises, Promises. And then when I finished in London, they brought me back into the show. And then I was there for another year, and then I left again. And then later on, the producer called me and said, Howard, he didn't like any of his other Martha Jeffersons. In fact, he was known to pick them up on stage and dance them around so their feet didn't touch the floor, because he just didn't like them, you know. And so they would bring me back to the show every now and then to make him feel better, you know. But I then sang Both Sides Now at his memorial, because he requested that in his will. But that was a really amazing experience, and he was one of my mentors and taught me a lot about acting and where to study and what to study and how to think, and genius guy, but, you know, vulnerable, really vulnerable.
One of my favorite character actors of all time. Thank you for that beautiful story. I never heard any of these before. I'm getting my act together and taking it on the road meant a lot to you. Fans of I'm Getting My Act Together. Because you had first met Gretchen Cryer, like you said, in 1776. That was a milestone musical. I mean, the way it was viewed here and everything else.
It was.
Yeah.
She was great, and I loved that show. And she originated the part. And then I think I was the third replacement. I was doing the TV show 8 Is Enough, and this was my second or third hiatus. Maybe it was my third hiatus. I think it was, yeah. And so I came in that spring and went into the show at Circle in the Square for 2 months. And everybody in the show was really tired. You know, they'd been doing it for a long time. And that was when I really learned how to work, how to apply the principles of meditation to my work. So when I started doing the show, I was wearing the same costume Gretchen had worn, in the high heels, you know, the little character shoes, and trying to play it again as everybody else thought it should be played, because Gretchen had originated it. And I was meditating, and in my meditations it came to me that I shouldn't really be wearing a skirt, and that I should be wearing little flat shoes, and that I should wear a little t-shirt and then an overshirt and a jacket and a scarf that kind of gradually came off during the show, and that the last silhouette of the girl was like this little tomboy girl, you know. And because she's so ardent on trying to get her manager to understand her feelings, and it's, you know, it's a real feminist musical. And I just had this real take on the part, and so I called Gretchen and I said, "Is that okay with you if I change some of the elements?" And she was like, sure, go ahead, because, you know, they'd been doing it for a while and it didn't matter. And So I spoke to the stage manager, he was fine, and the cast, that was fine. So I wore these these pants and the little outfit, that I'd found. And that gave me more freedom to run and play on the stage during the show. And then my meditation said, you need to really sit and get ready for the show and then sit and meditate and jump right up from meditation and go out there. And what happened was we'd have these sharing sessions on every Wednesday night. And as Heather Jones, I ran the sharing sessions, and I was at the point in my meditation where I could see how I was acting and how I was really feeling and what emotions I was feeling over here and what thoughts I was thinking. And more often than not, none of it was lined up. It's like I was thinking this, I was feeling that, and acting this. And I'd been studying acting for quite a while, and thought I was getting away with it. And so people literally would raise their hand on the Wednesday night sharing sessions and say, tonight I saw Heather Jones act like this, feel this, and think this. And they would quote the direct content of my mind, the exact words. And I knew that because I was at a place in my meditation where I could actually witness my own thoughts, in a more slowed down way. And that just scared me so much because I thought, oh my God, I'm entirely visible, because I thought, my experience of the world was that people didn't know what I was really thinking because I was acting so well, and preventing people from knowing how I really felt about many things. And so that really put me into a kind of crisis because I thought, well, what do I do if I'm entirely visible and if the things I'm thinking and feeling aren't lining up with what Heather Jones is supposed to be thinking and feeling? What do I do? What do I do? So I was asking that question, and my meditation was like, go sit in meditation, jump up right from meditation and run out there and follow your inner impulse. And whatever comes to you, follow it faithfully. And it will take a great leap of trust to do that. So it took a second to learn how to do it because I discovered it was a little like being a surfer. The wave would come, the wave of impulse, and if I missed the moment when to jump on the wave, I would fall off and crash, But if I listened really precisely, then the moment of the wave, and I would jump on at the right moment and ride the wave to the shore, and it was amazing, the inner guidance that was there if I just turned within and listened. Yeah. So that's when the costume changed and all that stuff. And my whole performance was transformed, and these very spontaneous things started happening. So I went to the stage manager again. I went to the actors who were basically the band members and the backup singers, and then my leading man. And I said, do you mind if I try some stuff? And they were like, no, because they were bored anyway, So go ahead. We're interested to see what you're going to do, So this way of working really started. It became really good. And the audience kind of came back to the show because the buzz went out that something good was happening at the Circle and the Square. And I got called into this big casting guy's office. He was a producer for Francis Coppola, a man named Fred Roos. He's considered one of the great casting minds in film, and he's produced many of Coppola's movies, and he also produced The Black Stallion, which was one of my favorite movies ever. And he called me into his office, and he said, I saw your performance in Getting Married Together. I just want you to know that you're now one of my actors, and I'm going to be sure you work in film. And he said, and these are the actors that I've made that happen for, Frederick Forrest, Terry Garr, blah, blah, blah. And then he was trying to get me together on a Coppola project, but I was working at that point again in 8 is Enough, so that didn't happen. But towards the end of that season on 8 is Enough, he sent me a script called Tender Mercies by Horton Foote, and he called me and he said, thank you. He called me and he said, they're looking for an actress who can really act, who can sing country western. And he said, I gave them one name. Go get the part. And I was like, oh my God, and it was starring Robert Duvall, and he was one of the producers as well. So I went in and I met Bruce Beresford, and I'd seen Breaker Morant just right before that, and his film, and I was like, thought it was so beautiful. And so I sat down with him. It was the easiest meeting I've ever had in the whole of my career. He said, you come highly recommended. And I said, thank you. And he said, can you act? And I said, yes. And he said, can you sing? I said, yes. He said, can you sing country western? And I said, yes, I'm from Texas. He said, do you want this job? And I said, yes. And that was it. And it was unbelievable.
That's simple.
Yeah. And that movie was like a dream come true. And I remember we would all go to the dailies. We were in this hotel, the Brookside Hotel in Waxahachie, Texas, which was 40 miles from where I grew up. And my aunt was the dance teacher in Waxahachie, so there we were home, you know. And but we would go to the dailies, and this guy, Chris Newman, who was our sound guy, who'd won numerous Academy Awards. Nobody spoke in the dailies. It was like deadly silent. And everybody in the movie was doing their portrait about alcoholism in relationships and stuff. And Chris leaned over to me and he goes, this is the ashram of movie making. You know, it was like, ooh, this is cool.
I love that.
It was so much fun. It was so much fun. And to work with Robert Duvall was a dream come true. He was amazing.
Well, we'll stay on film for a second. Roman Polanski, another brilliant director. And, you know, you worked in Frantic.
Yes.
What was he like working with?
He was fascinating. You know, his girlfriend, Emmanuelle Saunier, the movie was a vehicle for her, and she was just extraordinary, you know, like this extraordinary creature. And he was madly in love with her. And I loved watching him direct her because when he would direct her, one day I was watching him across this place where we were shooting a lot at dawn. And that's when I learned never take a film where there's a scene that shoots at dawn. Because we were there for weeks and it was freezing cold that spring in Paris. But anyway, it was a remarkable experience. But I watched him and he suddenly looked like he became this female ballet mistress directing this beautiful girl. And I was fascinated. He just would become these different people, you know, the way he directed. And I loved him. I loved working for him, and it was a great experience. And Harrison Ford was fantastic.
Sure. Any Carrie fans here? Well, first, with Carrie was Brian De Palma. You worked with him on the film. What was he like working as a director and playing that role in the film?
Well, I had auditioned for him for a film of his called Phantom of the Paradise, and he didn't cast me. But after he made the movie, he brought me in to loop the voices for a bunch of teenage girls and a couple of older people in the film, because he'd taken an interest in me. He came to see me in Pippin, and he visited my acting class as well. And so we became friends. And so then I started looping movies for him. And I had a skill for that. I'm not very good at looping myself, but I'm good at looping other people. And before the days of the supermodel, they would hire me to come in and they'd say, okay, this girl's 22 years old, and this is her lifestyle, create a voice for her. And so I did voices for supermodels a lot. And so, you know, I did that. And so I was good at looping, and he would cast in a couple of his movies. I did 3 movies for him in that way. He would cast these local people on location who weren't really actors, and then he would bring me in to do their voices, and that would create a semblance of a performance from them, which I thought was interesting, that just in the sound of the voice you can convey truth or whatever. And so that was really fun to do and to work for him, you know, because he was this hot director. And then he said, one day I got that any one of these parts would be a great debut for a kid like me, you know, that was studying acting so hard. And, you know, I'd been in Pippin forever, and to pay for my acting classes and my therapy. And so anyway, I finally said to him after the 3rd movie, I said, you know what, Brian, I'm not going to do this for you anymore because this is wrong. I said, there's all these actors in New York who would die to have any one of these parts, and you're going out on location to save money casting people who aren't even actors, and that's not fair to all of us who are committed to learning how to do this better, you know. And so he... he kind of thought about that, and then a few months later, he called me, and he asked me to go to dinner. So I went to dinner, and he gave me the novel of Carrie, and he said, "This is going to be my next movie, and I want you to play the gym teacher." And I was like, "Cool, you know, that's really nice." So I went home and I read the book, you know, and the gym teacher's part was like baby, and I thought that's still really nice, you know. And then a few months later, he sent me the script, and he had combined the role of the principal and the gym teacher into what was a beautiful film debut in the part of Miss Collins. She was Miss Desjardins in the book and then became Miss Collins. And I couldn't believe it. Again, it's a huge gift, and I just started crying when I read the script. I cried when I read that script, and I cried when I read Tender Mercies, because both of those were like huge gifts, you know. And then, so I did the film Carrie. We went to Hollywood. It was the first time I'd been to Hollywood. And there were 7 of us making our film debut. And he did a lot of rehearsal before we started. And so there was all this energy. We were all so excited to be doing a movie, you know. And it was Travolta's first movie, PJ Soles, Nancy Allen, me, Billy Cat, all of us, you know, were making our first movie. And Sissy, of course, had done other movies. And so that was really fun. And so there was just this tremendous energy of excitement on the set every day. And he was a wonderful director. One of my favorite lines of his was when I had my death scene. He said, it was like shot for camera, and it was this pendulum that came down, this basketball backboard that was supposed to crush Miss Collins as Carrie throws her against the wall. So you have to like throw yourself against the wall, you know, and then this thing comes down. And a few days before that, our lead stunt guy had been injured as he was catapulted backwards, and he missed the mattress he was supposed to land on. So all of us were pretty scared after that they didn't really know what they were doing, these stunt guys, you know. So the pendulum basketball backboard was all wood except for a foot of balsa that was supposed to hit against the body. So they shot 4 cameras where it comes flying down and stops right before it hits me. And then they insert a stunt woman who's dressed like me with a wig like me and stuff. And she takes the hit, and he says, watch her very carefully and then mimic her physicality. And then they put me in the shot for the close-up, and I'm supposed to mimic her. My mouth is filled with this blood thing, and I'm supposed to vomit that up and whatever. And his direction to me was this: squirm like a bug on a pin. And I was like... But don't you really get who Brian De Palma is from that? No. He was that little boy in elementary school when he did his insect collection who like put the pin in the bug before the formaldehyde, you know? So he's hilarious. And no, I love the guy. He's just he's a character. He's really interesting.
Director, I mean, that was like the perfect thing.
Squirm like a bug on a pin. So I was like...
And then tackling the musical.
Yeah, that was interesting.
Yeah. I see there's a story there.
Yeah. When they wrote it, Dean Pitchford, Michael Gore, Larry Cohen had written the screenplay of the film Carrie, and they were all my friends. And Dean called me and said, "We've written the musical of Carrie, and we want." And I was like, "Why?" And they said, "No, you don't get it. It's going to be great." And I said, "Really?" And he was like, "No, yeah, it'll be great. And we want you to play Margaret." And I was like, "Well, cool, you know." And so we started negotiating, and I met Terry Hands. And Terry Hands was the head of the RC at that point. And he and I didn't connect at that meeting. And I had my doubts about the show anyway. And so... and I had a big power broker agent at that point, and we started negotiating really strongly. And 3 months into the negotiation, we both agreed it wasn't going to work out. So they went on to Barbara Cook, and then they went to the RSC production. And they got the worst reviews in history. And Barbara Cook decided she wasn't coming in to Broadway. She didn't want to continue with the show. And so they called me again and wanted to fly me to London, and that didn't work out because I was busy. I think I was shooting Frantic, actually. And so couldn't happen. And so they sent me a video, and I thought she sang it beautifully. I mean, she's impeccable, of course. She's one of the great singers in the world. And but I watched it, you know, and I thought maybe I could bring something to it. And so we started negotiating again. And we were still negotiating. wasn't coming together. And finally, my agent called and said, look, if you don't go in, he says, what I've gotten for you is a guarantee if it closes. And I said, well, that sounds good. That'll be good. At least it's worth the risk, And so he said, if you don't go in, all these people will be out of work. And I said, you're right. And so I went in. And Lindsay Haley was fantastic. Yeah. And she was 17, and this was her first Broadway show. And my version of Margaret was very different than Barbara Cook's had been. And I'm an acting coach, and she was not an actress at that point. She was immensely talented. So I told her, and I worked with her in private with just the director, the music director, private space and all the mother-daughter stuff. And they were so wounded at that point with all the reviews and stuff that they basically said, sure, whatever you think, and that was nice. And so I said to Lindsay, I said, listen, I've got you, I'm going to take care of you. So watch my eyes, and whatever I give you, give it right back, as exactly the way you feel it, hold nothing back. And let's see what happens. Let's work on this really spontaneously, very improvisationally. And she trusted me. And that was great. So we worked all this mother-daughter stuff out, and we were literally having a physical battle while we were singing, Eve Was Weak, which is 5 verses of passionate operatic singing, It was pretty amazing. And we would share a car at night going home from the rehearsals, and we would both just be in the back seat, like exhausted, And so finally the day came for us to do the run-through. And people were literally terrified of what we were doing, because it was so real. And I was really proud of it, because I had worked for years and years with this brilliant psychologist. And I would take her my scripts, and she would counsel me as to what the psychology was of the character I was playing and how to accurately portray that. And so she was my consultant on many projects. And so I felt that the portrait that Lindsay and I were able to convey of an abusive mother-daughter situation was really realistic, very, very honest, and very, very truthful. And like the scene following Eve Was Weak, where Margaret is so violent with her and throws her into the cellar, after chasing her all around the stage while we're singing, which was pretty amazing stuff. At least, and it was very, very athletic, and tough to do. And Debbie Allen had me running wind sprints every morning after the dance warm-up, and then singing the high G that I had to sing at the end just to get strong enough to do it, And then the next scene, I come to get her in the basement, and it's this beautiful, beautiful song that Michael Dean wrote, and the roles are reversed. I'm like this child that she has to comfort after I've abused her, which is a dynamic that often happens, in mightily dysfunctional, abusive families. And I was really very proud of the work that we did. I just felt like it was breaking ground in the musical theater, and it was so provocative, though. People had huge responses to it. Some people really loved what we were doing, and some people didn't love it at all. And it was crazy. It was like an event. We would go out there, and the first performance, which was so wild. There's this huge Aztec staircase with this red rail that goes down the center of it. That was Terry Hand's design, and I never understood the Aztec staircase at the back of the prom, but anyway, that was part of how he saw it. He saw it as this Jacobean drama, and as opposed to the Americana of the story. So there were these disparate styles, There was the style of work that Lindsay and I were doing, which was very honest, very realistic. And then he had all the high school kids in togas, and no one understood. And later it was explained that at some cocktail party, they said to him, Terry, it's like Grease, meaning the musical. And he thought it was like Greek drama. And for example, he didn't understand the basketball references, which again are very American. Yeah. And he wanted to use a soccer ball, and Debbie Allen was, no, it has to be a basketball. It's little things like that. And so there were all these stylistic problems. And there were some numbers that literally didn't work. Anyway, I had to go up in this elevator to the top of the Aztec staircase to come down singing this lullaby to Carrie, who's been, doused with blood, at the prom and stuff. So I'm singing this lullaby, and behind my back I have this huge butcher knife, and so I'm like comforting her, and I take her in my arms, and we're at the middle section of the Aztec stairs, and I'm comforting her and singing, and then I stab her in the back, and then she stops my heart, crawls down another few steps, sings a few notes, and then after I die, she dies. And then we were choreographed to, in the dark, then it's a blackout, and then as the lights came up, we were to stand and take a bow and then run off for the official bows to start. So first performance. She goes out for her first number and she stops the show cold. 17 years old, Broadway debut, stops the show cold. It's backstage, and I was like, oh, that's so great. And then it was my first number, and I stopped the show, and it's like amazing, and the audience is going nuts the whole show, and like as I get to the top of the stairs, somebody yells, "Betty Buckley, come on down!" And it was like crazy. I mean, people were crazy. The energy in the audience was nuts. I mean, just just crazy. People had such a response to that material, and so I stab her, she kills me, she crawls down, she dies, and in the dark, the entire audience, as the lights go out, start to boo en masse. And never in my life have I experienced anything like that. And I was like, oh my God. I mean, they are booing. And I thought, oh, this is like a theatrical riot. And I remember, I literally was on stage in the dark thinking of my survey of theater course my freshman year in college, where they said, some of the Ibsen's early work created theatrical riots, and some of the Jacobean dramas created theatrical riots, which was exactly what Terry Hands wanted to happen, And I thought, oh my God, I'm in the middle of a theatrical riot. This is so exciting. And I was like, so they're booing en masse. Now, poor little Lindsay, 17, has just opened in her first Broadway show, has just stopped the show with every song she's sung. She turns to me in the dark. I'm her coach. I'm her mentor. She trusts me. And she turns around, and she's closer to the booing masses than I am, right? And so she's terrified. And she turns around to me in the dark. She goes, what do I do? And I go, stand up, because we have to get out of here. And so... So we stand up as the lights come up, and immediately the booing goes to full house standing ovation in a split second. That's how schizophrenic it was. And we went off stage and we were like, what just happened? It was like, it was like that every performance. It was crazy.
We were there. A few of us were here. I loved it. I had my ticket stub, and I still had my playbill from seeing that wonderful performance. My final question for you is, what is the best bit of advice that you've been given that you live by?
I think I pretty much said it earlier. For those of you that are actors and singers, you have to love this craft, the craft of singing, the craft of acting, the craft of storytelling, more than anything, and you have to commit yourself to learn more and more and more and more about that. And as long as your life path is about study and getting better, I think it's really important to watch artists that you really admire. Like, this is what I've done, watch the actors and actresses that you really admire who do a quality of work that you are touched by, whatever that is. And singers and dancers and choreographers, artists, great artists, study them. And then find out how they learn to do that. That's what I did. Whenever I really loved someone, I would say, where do you study? And fortunately was generously guided to the right people. Because not every teacher in this city or elsewhere has a clue about what they're doing. And honestly, they don't. And I've been very fortunate to avoid some of these kinds of charlatan teachers. And there are some really excellent teachers in New York and excellent studios. And then study and make that your joy. The craft is your joy. Because show business is very cyclical. And one day they love you and the next day they won't take your calls. It doesn't matter what you accomplish. That continues on. And that was shocking to learn. And it's a very complicated business. Our culture is very complicated. Every business is very complicated. It's full of weirdness and politics and egos that are enormous. But if you persist with the love of your craft and the study of excellence, then I think you're protected. And then over the course of that time and that study, you can honestly say to yourself, I have an expertise that I have a right to say that I own because I've worked really hard for years and years, and I've paid a lot of money to have this expertise. And I've studied with the best possible people. In fact, I still study with them. And then you can walk on a stage in an audition or any circumstance where there's resistance of any kind or the world of opinion and protect yourself because you know who you are. And you don't put your talent or your expertise in the hands of the world of opinion, because one day they love you and the next day they don't. And one day they think you hung the moon, and the next day they say things about you that you can't even begin to recognize about yourself, and you must never take any of that to heart. My brother, who's a wonderful guy, Norma Buckley, says, praise and blame, praise and blame, praise and blame, they're all the same. And when you can live your life calmly in that, which doesn't mean that you won't experience enormous disappointment and loss, but you just keep going and you keep committed. And the other thing that I think is really important is to be very interested in your own maturing and aging process. It's a good thing. It's a good thing. And our culture is so terrified of maturity and aging, and we worship youth, and we think anything short of that is somehow, there's something wrong with it. And I know for sure that there isn't anything wrong with this aging process. You know, thank you. There's tremendous grace and the possibility of enormous wisdom. And if it weren't for the faults of the confusion of our culture, we could be so much easier on ourselves. I think that's very important. And I think in the world of show business, where you will always, according to the world of opinion, be too young, too old, too fat, too thin, too pretty, not pretty enough. There'll always be something off if you are interested in that world or if you listen to it. And it's very hard not to listen to it. It's very hard to keep your own counsel. For me, meditation and prayer and brilliant psychologists have very much helped me, and I highly recommend all of that for aspiring or, actors, singers, storytellers. I recommend that for everybody because I think we live in a culture that is very confused about most everything. And so within that, again, then you can find a real sacred honor in being a storyteller, because we need storytellers that tell us the truth about humanity and the world around us. I've always thought of myself, and I tell my students, we're undercover artists, right? It's like in the story you're telling, it seems to be about this show, it seems to be about this song or this body of songs. It's not. It's about making people remember who they really are. That's the mission, and making other human beings feel good about who they really are, despite all this craziness. And if you can do that, then your life can just keep going, and you can feel a real sense of worth, and that you're sharing something that's important because it is. So,
thank you. I have done this for a long time, and I have to say that this afternoon, thank you for being so honest, so emotional. This was absolutely beautiful. Thank you, Betty.
Thank you. Thanks, Richard. It's been a pleasure.
Miss Betty Buckley.